Welcome. Today's tutorial covers GoSTEM's Creative Computing Kit, lesson number 5, titled, How Does a Bee-Bot Work? We get to play with little robots in the shapes of bees today. Pretty fun. This lesson, like the others, is adapted from the Computer Science in San Francisco curriculum. And the objectives for this lesson include that students will be able to discover and articulate the functions of each button and switch on a Bee-Bot. And then the second objective is that the students will be able to use a Bee-Bot as a tool for self-expression and group play. Here are the materials that you're going to need for this lesson. First, here's the lesson plan that's included in your kit. And then here are the Bee-Bots, aren't they cute? You're going to want one Bee-Bot for every group of 2 to 4 students. And then each group will also need a driver lanyard. And here are some teacher guides for the Bee-Bot so you can learn all the details of how to use them. And then also here's the badge chart for celebrating what the students learned during this lesson. A couple of other notes about materials. You are also going to want a 1-minute timer displayed for your students to see. Now we have linked in the master materials list and the lesson plan a 1-minute timer that has a 10-second transition between minutes so that the students can transition drivers. Also, I just want to make a note about the Bee-Bots and charging them. So you're going to want your Bee-Bots well charged before you start the lesson. And it's noted in the instructional guides that you don't want to charge these Bee-Bots for more than 4 hours at a time. So once they've charged for about 4 hours, go ahead and unplug them. Welcome your students back to Creative Computing, where you're all on a journey to learn how to use the power of computers to help us solve problems and to express ourselves. And last time you and your students practiced following a sequence of steps to make origami art. And what's it called when we put a sequence of steps together to complete a task? Yes, an algorithm. You all earned your algorithm badge last time. So today we're actually going to get to use a computer, and we're going to have to learn how to tell it what to do, give it some inputs and outputs. So the computer that we're going to use is a little robot, and yes, robots are a kind of computer. And this robot looks a whole lot like a bee. All right, so we're going to do 3 things today with our Bee-Bot. First, we're going to learn how our Bee-Bot works. That's number 1. Number 2, we're going to learn how to take care of our Bee-Bot because we need to be very kind to our Bee-Bot. And then number 3, we're going to learn how to take turns using the Bee-Bot. Now to get your students' juices flowing, you're going to want to hold the Bee-Bot and make sure the students can see it pretty well, but ask them some questions like, what do you think is on the inside of this Bee-Bot? And then how do you think we turn it on? How would we maybe turn it on? And what do you think these buttons do? Do the symbols or the letters, do they give us a clue about what those buttons do? And then also, how might we turn it off? And then maybe lastly, how would you want to make sure you took care of a Bee-Bot? Now we have a few suggested rules for the Bee-Bot, and you might want to come up with your own that makes sense for your situation. But the rules include when the students hold on to the Bee-Bot that they hold it with both hands. Not like what I'm demonstrating right now. And then that the students only use the Bee-Bots on the floor, that they're not putting it on a table or anything. Another rule would be that if the Bee-Bot hits an obstacle, that the students remove the obstacle or move the Bee-Bot out of the way of the obstacle. And then students also don't want to push or pull or use the Bee-Bot like a toy car or anything. It could hurt some of the gears in there. And then also to make sure and take turns with each other. It's time to model how to take turns with the Bebot. You'll want to display somehow the 1-minute timer so all of the students in the class can see that and also hear it when it goes off and a time is up. And remember, there's that 10-second transition for students to transition from driver to driver. And as I said before, the driver will wear their driver lanyard. So whoever's wearing the driver lanyard gets to operate the Bebot. Remember, they're going to be on the floor, but for recording purposes, I'm going to just stand up here. And this will be an opportunity for the students to press all the buttons, slide things back and forth, figure out what all of these things do. And there's no shortage of buttons that they can press. Just let them go for it for 1 minute. And it's important for the other group mates to watch along, because the more they watch, the more they'll learn. And so hopefully over time they can cumulatively learn about what these buttons actually do on the Bebot. All right, educators, I know you have the instructional materials for how to operate a Bebot, but I would really encourage you to follow the same process as your students, where you're not really given any information and you just play around and explore what all of the different buttons are, so that you have a similar experience as your students. So you might be able to help them guide any questions or guide any confusion that they might have around the Bebot. All right, now that everyone's had a chance to play around with their Bebot and the group has gathered some information about what all the buttons do, gather all the groups together and debrief what they all learned so everybody's on the same page. So you can ask questions like, what does each button do? And what does each switch do? And what does the X mean? What does the G and O mean? So just going through the Bebot to make sure that the students are clear now about what those buttons do. And then now that you've gathered that information, it's time to get creative with our Bebots. And we're going to use those timed turns again, using the driver lanyards, moving those around, and it will stay with 1 minute, the 1-minute timer. But this time, the driver will always start out by pressing the X. The X clears the memory, and then the driver is going to teach the Bebot a dance. And it's going to press 1 to 4 buttons to teach that Bebot a dance. And what's really cool is while the Bebot is dancing, the other group mates follow along. So it's a really great kinesthetic way for all of the students to engage. Then after the minute is up, so maybe each student can teach more than one dance. They've got the whole minute to play around and pressing X between dances to clear the memory. And then after that 1 minute, the new driver gets the lanyard and presses the X to clear the memory and gets again to make a little dance with the Bebot with 1 to 4 moves. After all of the students have had a chance to program their Bebot, have a few students showcase their dances to the whole class, and the whole class can dance along with them. And then ask, as the whole group, what kind of problems came up while you were programming your Bebots today? And then what inputs did you use to tell the Bebot to do things? Then how did the Bebot output that information? And let's just take a step back. What is a computer again? And you probably want to ask your students, who would you like to thank today for treating the Bebot really well, or for having great ideas? So now it's time to take a look at your badge chart. It's time to celebrate all that they've learned today in creative computing, because they've all earned the badge, Use a Computer, today. It's pretty exciting. Good job, everybody. And as always, you have your grab and go card to keep along with you as an at-a-glance view of the lesson. And with that, that does it for lesson 5. Thanks for watching.